The wind had a strange bite that morning, as if it carried the ghosts of something unresolved. Chief Everett Langford stepped out of the precinct, his boots hitting the concrete with the weight of 30 years in uniform. At his side walked Huxley, the German shepherd who had been more than a partner, he had been family. For nearly a decade, the two had shared patrols, arrests, moments of quiet pride, and moments of deafening violence. But this morning, there was something in the air that neither man nor dog could ignore. Everett barely had time to take 3 steps when Huxley froze completely, his strong frame locked up like stone. His ears twitched toward the glass doors they had just exited, and then his body began to tremble. First it was subtle like a shiver, but then it grew deeper, more violent. Everett stopped mid-stride. "Huxley," he said, half command, half concern. The dog didn't move. He let out a low, wounded whine, a sound Everett hadn't heard since Huxley's earliest days in training. It wasn't fear of something present. It was recognition of something old. Everett turned toward the station doors. Nothing seemed out of place until his eyes landed on the bulletin board inside. A sheet of paper had been pinned up, crooked and loud in its silence. Hadn't been there that morning, and from where Everett stood, he could already feel its weight. Slowly, he approached the door, each step heavier than the last. Huxley stayed behind, rooted to the pavement like he physically could not follow. Everett opened the door and stepped into the lobby, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly above. The photo was grainy, surveillance style. It showed a narrow alley drenched in shadow. A man lay face down in blood, limp and lifeless, and standing over him, a younger Everett, hand on his holstered weapon. At his side, Huxley, just barely out of adolescence, frozen in a stance of alert tension. The image hit Everett like a punch to the chest. It was a night long buried, the case never fully closed, a choice never spoken of. That night, how could anyone have this photo? It was supposed to be sealed, locked away forever. Beneath the image, scribbled in thick red ink, were the words, "The past always knows the way back." Everett's hands began to shake. His breath shallowed. The photo didn't just stir memories. It cracked something open. Behind him, through the glass, he could see Huxley slowly lowering to the ground. The dog's body language said everything. He remembered. He never forgot. And now, the one secret they both carried had returned, uninvited, and pinned to the wall like a public execution. The leash slipped from Everett's hand. He stood there, frozen, surrounded by the sterile calm of the precinct, while his heart pounded like war drums in his chest. Someone was sending a message, not just to him, but through him. The past hadn't knocked. It had walked through the front door and stared him dead in the eye. And Huxley, the one soul who had been there that night, was already breaking under the weight of a truth that refused to stay buried. This was just the beginning. Drop a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe. We're getting close to 100,000 subscribers and you can be part of that. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. Everett and Huxley's story is just getting started. The precinct felt different now, colder, quieter, as if the walls themselves knew something had surfaced. Chief Everett Langford stood motionless in front of the bulletin board, eyes locked on that haunting photo. He could feel the faint vibration of his own pulse echoing through his fingertips. Huxley hadn't moved from outside. Through the glass, Everett could still see him, body low, tail curled inward, eyes fixed on a memory that was no longer silent. The dog wasn't just afraid, he was reliving something. Everett tore the paper from the board with a shaking hand and slipped it inside his coat, careful not to draw attention, but he felt eyes on him. A young patrol officer, Bennett, fresh out of academy, gave him a curious glance from the hallway. Everett offered a forced nod and turned away. He didn't want questions. Not yet. He wasn't ready to answer them. Not until he understood who was behind this, and what they wanted. More importantly, how they had accessed something that was never meant to see daylight again. Back outside, Everett crouched beside Huxley, his knees popping like old hinges. "Talk to me, buddy," he whispered, brushing a hand over the dog's head. Huxley closed his eyes at the touch but didn't lift his head. His entire body trembled beneath Everett's palm. And that's when Everett saw it. The scar. A small one, nearly hidden beneath fur near Huxley's left shoulder. A scar he hadn't seen in years. It had happened that night. The night in the alley. The night Everett made a choice. A mistake. One that came with silence as the price. His mind fought the images flooding back. Screams, a gunshot, the smell of wet asphalt and blood. That man's eyes, wide open even in death. Everett had written it off as justified. Clean. But that photo said otherwise. Someone else had been there. Someone who saw something different. And now they wanted him to remember exactly what he had chosen to forget. Guilt crept in like a shadow under the door. Not just guilt for what happened, but for dragging Huxley into it. Forcing the dog to carry a memory that even he couldn't explain. Everett stood, leash in hand, and Huxley slowly followed. Still shaken, they didn't go back inside. Instead, they turned toward the side lot and walked in silence. The wind had picked up, rattling a loose sign near the fencing. The town felt smaller now, like the past was closing in from all sides. Everett knew the photo was a warning, but it was also a trigger. Someone wanted him rattled. Someone wanted him to dig. And the worst part was, part of him knew exactly where to start looking, because there was one other person who had been there that night. One officer, one witness, one name he hadn't spoken in 15 years. A name he'd hoped was buried just as deep as that alley memory. But if the past was clawing its way back, Everett had no choice. He pulled out his phone, stared at the contact still saved under retired. His thumb hovered. One call could open a door he swore would stay shut. But the way Huxley looked at him, it wasn't just a plea. It was permission. The phone rang 4 times. Each second felt longer than the last. Everett Langford stood by the back fence of the precinct parking lot, the cold metal of the gate against his shoulder. Huxley sat at his feet, calmer now, but still unusually quiet. On the 5th ring, a voice answered, gravelly, aged, and cautious. Langford. Everett hadn't heard that voice in over a decade, but it hit him like a slap to the chest. Ray Calderon, the only other officer who had been there that night. The only one who knew. I got something, Everett said, skipping the greetings. A photo showed up on the precinct board this morning. The alley. That night. Silence on the line. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Just stillness. Then, Ray's voice came back softer now. I knew it would resurface. Sooner or later. I told you, Ev, you can't bury something that deep without roots growing up around it. Everett looked down at Huxley, who had lifted his head slightly, ears twitching as if he recognized the name through the phone. Everett's grip tightened on the phone. Did you talk to anyone about what really happened? Ray let out a dry, humorless laugh. You think I'm stupid? I've been living in a cabin with no mailbox for a reason. But if someone got that photo, they didn't get it from me. There was something in Ray's voice, something not quite fear, but not far from it either. Everett felt a chill run up his spine. Then who? He asked. Who else even knew we were there? Ray paused, and when he spoke again, the weight in his voice was unmistakable. Maybe it's not about who knew. Maybe it's about who was left behind. Those words sat heavy in Everett's chest like a stone. The man in the alley. No name, no family. Just another violent end in a dark corner of Springfield. The report had been clean, approved, filed away. But Everett remembered the moment. Just before the shot was fired, when something in that man's eyes shifted. Fear, recognition, regret. He had never been sure. All he knew was that everything had gone wrong. And now, someone was digging where no one was supposed to dig. Ray gave him an address. Meet me tonight, 10 o'clock. Don't bring anyone. And Langford, this doesn't go through the department. Not yet. The line went dead. Everett slid the phone back into his pocket, his breath fogging in the air. The day was colder now, but not from the weather. Huxley stood up and leaned gently into his leg, as if grounding him. Everett looked down at the dog, that silent witness to everything. Whatever they were walking back into, it wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. As they returned to the cruiser, Everett glanced once more at the station's front doors. Something was unraveling. Something personal. Someone wanted him to relive that night. Not for closure, but for confrontation. And deep down, he feared the most dangerous thing about all this wasn't the secret. It was what else he might uncover along the way. The forest road was barely lit, the cruiser's headlights cutting through the heavy curtain of mist that had settled over the outskirts of Springfield. Everett Langford gripped the wheel tighter as he turned off the main highway, following the faded directions Ray had texted him earlier. Huxley sat in the passenger seat, ears twitching, alert but silent. They hadn't spoken a word. Not that either of them needed to. The weight of the past was already sitting between them like a passenger that refused to be seen. The address led to a dirt path hidden between two dying oak trees. No mailbox, no lights, just woods and darkness. Everett eased the car forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Huxley let out a low rumble from his throat. A sound Everett hadn't heard in years. Not a bark, not a growl. A warning. Something was off. He parked and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Everett stepped out first, hand instinctively brushing against the grip of his holstered weapon. Ray's cabin sat at the edge of the woods, half swallowed by shadows. The porch light was on, but the windows were dark. Everett approached slowly, Huxley at his side, tail low and body tense. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. Ray stood there, older than Everett remembered, with sunken eyes and a shotgun resting loosely in his hands. He didn't smile. "You came," Everett nodded. "Who else knows?" Ray stepped aside. "You better come in." The inside of the cabin was cluttered but clean. Newspapers stacked in corners, an old radio playing static. On the kitchen table sat a thick folder, bound with a piece of twine. Ray pointed to it. "That wasn't mine. It showed up last week. No note, just left on my doorstep." Everett opened it. Inside were copies of photos, some familiar, some not. The alley photo, the body, other shots from different angles. Too many for just one camera. There were others watching that night. Ray muttered, "We weren't alone." Huxley paced near the door, restless, then suddenly stopped. His ears shot up. His eyes locked on the window, then to the door, then back to Everett. His body tensed like he was waiting for something. Everett turned sharply. "What is it?" Huxley let out that same low rumble, deeper this time. Protective. Urgent. Ray reached for the shotgun, eyes narrowing. "He's picking up something." Everett moved to the window and looked out. Nothing but trees and fog, but his gut twisted. Something was out there, watching, waiting. Ray stepped closer, voice low and grim. "They're not just digging up the past, Everett. They're tracking it, watching us. Which means one thing, this isn't about what we did anymore. It's about what they're going to do with it." Outside, a branch snapped in the woods. Huxley turned sharply, teeth bared. Whatever was out there wasn't done yet. And neither was the story that Everett had tried to bury. It had followed him here, into the dark, into the trees. And it was getting closer. The snap of the branch outside wasn't just a sound. It was a signal. Everett Langford felt the chill crawl up his spine as he backed away from the window. Eyes darting toward Huxley, who stood motionless, locked on the door like a statue carved from tension. In the dim light of the cabin, even the air felt heavier. Outside, the fog thickened against the glass like breath. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was out there. Ray Calderon killed the lights with one swift motion. Darkness folded into the room. "They're watching. No need to make it easy." He reached into a drawer and pulled out an old revolver and a small flashlight. Everett slid his sidearm from the holster and crouched near the wall. This wasn't a standoff. They didn't know what they were facing. Only that someone had been digging into their past, and now had stepped out of the shadows to make it known. Then came the growl. Low, deep. It rolled from Huxley's chest like a warning from another world. He took one cautious step toward the door, ears pressed back. Everett followed the dog's gaze into the fog beyond the porch. Something moved out there. Barely a silhouette, just beyond the line where vision ended and fear began. "I'm going out," Everett whispered. Ray nodded without a word. The front door creaked open, releasing a gust of air that smelled like wet leaves and rusted metal. The woods swallowed them almost instantly. Fog wrapped around their legs as Everett and Huxley stepped forward. Every twig snap underfoot, a jolt to the nerves. Then, without warning, Huxley broke into a sprint, veering left into the trees. "Huxley!" Everett ran after him, lungs burning, heart hammering. Ray's flashlight swung behind them, casting wild shadows across the trunks. And then, just beyond a clearing, Huxley stopped, dead still. Everett reached him seconds later, and froze. Standing in the fog, half concealed by the trees, was a man. Tall, still. His coat hung like a curtain, face obscured by shadow. He didn't speak, didn't move, only raised one arm slowly, and let something fall from his hand to the ground. A soft thud. Then he turned and disappeared into the mist, leaving Everett, Huxley, and Ray staring at what had been left behind. What do you think the man dropped? A clue or a threat? Comment what you do in Everett's place. Follow Huxley into the fog or stay in the cabin. The object lay in the dirt like it didn't belong there. Out of place in the wilderness, too deliberate to be trash. Everett approached slowly, flashlight beam trembling over the leaves. Huxley remained still, body tense, as if warning Everett not to touch it. Ray stood behind them, breathing heavily, eyes scanning the woods in case the man returned. But he didn't. He was gone, melted into the fog like he had never been there at all. Everett knelt beside the object. It was a small cassette tape, sealed in a clear plastic bag, with a note taped to the outside. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. "You saw one side, hear the other." He turned it over in his hand, his breath catching in his throat. A number was written on the back, case hashtag 417B. Everett knew that number. He hadn't said it aloud in 15 years, but it had haunted him. That was the official designation for the alley case, the one that had ended a man's life and changed his own forever. Ray saw it too. That case was sealed. How the hell does someone have a recording? Everett didn't answer right away. His mind was racing. There hadn't been any official audio that night, no dash cam, no body mic. But there was a moment he remembered clearly. After the shot was fired, they had both heard a click, like a recorder starting or stopping. They had dismissed it. A broken device, they assumed. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had been recording everything from the dark? Huxley let out a short, sharp bark, startling both men. It wasn't a warning. It was impatience, urgency. Everett looked at him, and for a moment he swore the dog knew, as if Huxley understood that the truth wasn't buried anymore, just hidden behind layers of silence and fear. He tucked the cassette into his coat and stood. "We need to find a way to play this." Ray shook his head. "It's bait." "Maybe," Everett said. "But if this tape tells the other side of the story, we can't ignore it." They walked back to the cabin in silence, each step heavier than the last. Everett's mind was unraveling. Flashes of the night, the gun, the fear in that man's eyes, the blood on the concrete. Was it really self-defense? Or had he pulled the trigger too fast? Was the story he had built to survive now crumbling under the weight of something real? The fog seemed to close in tighter around them, as if the forest wanted to keep them there, as if it too remembered. When they reached the porch, Huxley stopped at the bottom step. He turned and looked back at the trees one more time. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just watched, quietly, like he knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Everett stepped past him, clutching the tape. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man trying to outrun his past. He felt like someone about to meet it face to face. The cassette player sat on the table like an artifact from another life. Ray had found it buried in a closet, covered in dust, but still working. The kind of relic no one used anymore, except maybe the kind of person who wanted a secret kept analog, untraceable. Everett stood beside him, arms crossed, heart pounding. Huxley sat near the doorway, his eyes fixed on the table, head slightly tilted, ears perked. He was listening before the play button was even pressed. Ray inserted the tape and hit play. The machine clicked word and then static. A few seconds passed, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. And then a voice, male, frantic, breathing hard. "I don't want to die. Please don't." Then a scuffle, a grunt, a command shouted, "Stop, get on the ground." That was Everett's voice. Younger, sharper, louder. Then another voice raised, barely audible. "He's not reaching, Everett, he's not." Then a gunshot, loud, final. The tape hissed for several seconds after. Everett's legs felt weak. He reached out, bracing himself on the edge of the table. He had forgotten Ray had said that. In the moment, adrenaline had drowned everything. But now, here it was recorded, undeniable. Ray had tried to stop him, even if only a second before the shot. And that meant Everett hadn't acted out of clear danger. He had fired, in fear, in panic. "Play it again," Everett whispered. Ray hesitated, then pressed rewind. The mechanical were filled the room. The second time, Everett focused not on the words but the pauses, the tone. The man's voice, whoever he was, wasn't threatening. It was pleading. The scuffle was brief, but the shift in Everett's own tone was obvious. From control to fear, from command to impulse. And that was the moment everything changed. Huxley let out a soft whine and inched closer to the table, placing his paw gently against one of its legs. Everett looked down, and something inside him twisted. "I filed a clean report," he muttered. Said the suspect reached for a weapon. Ray stayed silent. They both knew there hadn't been one. There never had been. Everett sat down slowly, the tape still spinning, playing the breathless, broken pieces of a moment he had rewritten in his mind for 15 years. The silence afterward was the worst part. The sound of nothing, of a man dying in the cold, with no one to tell his side until now. Ray finally spoke. "So what do we do now?" Everett stared at the machine, jaw tight. "Someone wanted me to hear that. Not just to remember, but to answer for it." Outside, the wind picked up again. Huxley turned toward the door, tail twitching. The fog had cleared, but the shadows felt deeper than ever. Everett stood up, gripping the table. "We find out who he was, who sent this, and what else they want." Because this was only step one. The next morning broke gray and hollow, with clouds hanging low like a ceiling about to collapse. Everett sat alone in his office at the precinct, the cassette tape tucked deep in his coat pocket. Ray had insisted they keep it quiet, for now, but Everett knew time was running out. Whoever sent that tape was watching, and they weren't done. He turned on his desktop computer and logged into the old Springfield police archives. His fingers hovered for a moment before typing it. Case hashtag 417B. The report loaded, black and white text, sanitized, cold. Everett stared at the words as if they might change. Suspect. Unknown male. Proximate. Age 30 to 40. No ID. That part hadn't changed. No name. No match in the database. Fingerprints had come back as inconclusive, and no one ever came forward to claim the body. He had been buried as a John Doe. Just another statistic in a city that moved too fast to mourn. But Everett wasn't moving fast anymore. He was stuck, trapped between memory and guilt. He clicked through attached files, photos, autopsy notes. There was something missing. Something obvious. A missing time code in the surveillance sequence. Almost 5 minutes unaccounted for. How had he never noticed that before? His hand moved to Huxley's head, scratching absently behind his ear. The dog leaned into the touch, then suddenly froze. His ears twitched, his body stiffened. Everett looked down. "What is it?" Huxley was staring at the screen, at a blurry surveillance photo of the alley, focused not on the body, but on a graffiti tag on the far wall. Everett zoomed in. The tag was old, faded, barely legible. But as he enhanced it, letters emerged. K13. That meant nothing to him. Not yet. But Huxley didn't look away. His stare remained locked, Focused, almost anxious, Everett searched the term in the database. Nothing relevant. Then he opened external records, gang activity logs from 15 years ago. His heart jumped when he saw it. K-13 was a local crew, small, violent, and wiped out in a raid just weeks after the alley shooting. One name stood out in the arrest records. Emilio Cortez, a low-level informant who had worked briefly with Springfield PD. Arrested, then released, and 2 weeks later disappeared. Everett leaned back in his chair. "Is that who he was?" he whispered. "Is that the man I—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but the pieces were starting to form a shape. This wasn't random. Someone knew that Emilio had a story, maybe proof, maybe evidence, and they were bringing it all back to the surface. A soft bark from Huxley pulled him out of his thoughts. The dog had walked to the door, standing tall, ears alert. Someone was coming. Everett checked the clock. Too early for visitors. Too early for anything routine. He stood, tension crawling up his spine. Whoever was behind this. They were done hiding in the shadows, and Everett was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to make him remember. The knock came slow, measured, not like someone asking to come in, but like someone reminding you they're already here. Everett Langford approached the front desk of the precinct cautiously, hand near his sidearm. Through the glass doors, a figure stood waiting. Tall, slim, dressed in a dark coat and black gloves despite the mild air. Huxley had already begun to growl, low and steady. His body tensed like a drawn bowstring. Everett opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The man didn't smile. He pulled a small envelope from his coat and held it out. "You've been digging," he said flatly. "It's time to stop." Everett didn't take the envelope at first. He just stared at the man's face. Calm, clean, forgettable in a way that made it even more unnerving. The man dropped the envelope at Everett's feet and turned to leave without another word. Huxley lunged forward, barking fiercely. Everett held him back, but his own instincts were screaming. Back inside, he tore open the envelope. Inside was a photo, printed from an old film camera. It showed Everett 15 years ago in the alley, gun drawn, standing over Emilio Cortez, who was on his knees with hands up, not reaching, not armed, not a threat. And in the corner of the image, a shadow, a third person, partially hidden, barely visible, but unmistakably real. There was someone else there, Everett whispered, voice cracking. Ray had never seen it. Everett had never seen it. But whoever had this photo had seen it all. Also in the envelope was a note, handwritten in the same jagged scrawl from the cassette tape. "You weren't the only one who pulled a trigger that night." Everett felt the weight of those words hit like concrete. Huxley, silent now, pressed against his leg. The air in the room felt thinner. If someone else had been there, if another shot was fired, then the truth he'd buried wasn't just incomplete. It was manipulated, maybe even weaponized. But why now? And by whom? Ray called minutes later. "Someone broke into my cabin," he said, voice shaking. "Didn't take anything. Just left something." It was a second tape. No label. No markings. "They want us to play it." Everett stared at the one he still had. 2 sides to every story, and now 2 tapes. He glanced at Huxley, who had already turned to the door. Ears perked. He was ready, maybe more ready than Everett, because dogs don't lie, and they never forget. Everett picked up his badge and holstered his weapon. "Meet me in 1 hour," he told Ray. "We finish this tonight." The shadows outside stretched long across the pavement. The past wasn't done with him, and someone out there was counting on that. But Everett wasn't the same man he had been in that alley. He was older, heavier, and this time he wasn't alone. This time Huxley would be by his side, not just as a partner, but as a witness to the truth, whatever it turned out to be. The abandoned church on the edge of town stood like a skeleton in the dark. Windows shattered, roof sagging, walls covered in ivy and silence. Everett parked the cruiser out front just as Ray pulled in behind him. They didn't speak. There was no need. The message was clear. Bring both tapes. Come alone. But Everett hadn't come alone. Huxley was with him, eyes sharp, body tense, tail unmoving. The dog hadn't made a sound the entire ride. Inside, dust floated through the flashlight beams like ash. The pews were broken, the altar was crumbling, and at the far end, someone waited. The man from the precinct door, standing beneath the remains of a stained glass window. On the floor before him sat a small, rusted tape recorder. "You made it," he said. His voice was calm, like this was a meeting, not a reckoning. Everett stepped forward, Ray behind him. "Who are you?" he asked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he clicked play. The second tape began with silence. Then, a different voice, Emilio Cortez, crying, pleading. "I told you everything. You promised me protection." Pause. Then Ray's voice, younger, harder. "You're not walking away from this. You were never meant to." Then a second gunshot. Not Everett's. Deeper, closer, final. Everett's eyes snapped to Ray, who stood frozen. "You said he was reaching," Everett whispered. "You said I was the one who fired." Ray didn't respond. He couldn't. The man stepped forward. "My name is Luis Cortez. Emilio was my brother." His face twisted with pain held too long. "He was a small-time informant, yes, but he trusted your department. He begged to do the right thing. And you," he looked straight at Ray, "executed him, and let another man carry the guilt." Ray dropped his gaze. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." Everett clenched his fists. "You let me live with it. You let Huxley carry it too." Suddenly, Huxley growled. A low, guttural sound that cut through the room. He stepped between Everett and Luis, not in aggression, but in protection. For years, he had been silent, loyal, carrying memories no one asked him to, and now he was standing in judgment. Luis dropped the gun he had been hiding in his coat, not out of fear but in surrender. His eyes filled. "I wanted revenge, but watching you suffer for a crime you didn't commit, that was worse. I only wanted you to hear him. One last time." The silence that followed was absolute. Everett stepped forward, placing a hand on Huxley's head. "You did what no one else could. You gave him back his voice." Ray turned and walked away, his career and conscience shattered. Luis disappeared into the night without another word. Everett stood in the center of the ruined church, the weight of the years finally falling away. He looked down at Huxley, his partner, his witness, his only constant. "We're done here, boy," he whispered. Huxley didn't wag his tail. He simply closed his eyes and leaned into Everett's side. If the story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Huxley's story deserves to be remembered. Share it with someone who believes in the power of truth.